Hello, everyone, and welcome to Navigating the Gray Areas of Policy Abuse. I'm Johanna Andom, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Forder, and your host for the re-recording of this webinar. On the docket for today, we will first embark on a journey together through the intricate world of policies from the lens of a customer to help us set the stage, explore the gray areas of policymaking, and discuss the challenges in building effective policies using a real example. After that, we'll dig into policy abuse trends merchants like you are experiencing today, discuss why creating policies to navigate those trends can be difficult, especially when trying to protect customer experience, and we'll share our perspective on what you need to create an effective policy leveraging Forder's approach. Finally, we'll conclude by answering your questions from Q&A submissions. But before we do, let's get started with the story. Now, each of us have a unique experience as being both a consumer and someone who is responsible for stopping policy abuse. So we know how challenging it can be to safely curate these great experiences, but it's likely that many of you listening today have also been on the receiving end of some not so great experiences. And I have a quick story to share about a recent experience I have that unfortunately falls into that category of being not so great. Now, as a bit of background, I am bicoastal. So New York is my home now, but I still spend a significant chunk of my time in my home state of California. I'm also what some may call a bit of a self-care fanatic, and I've built up quite the routine over the years, which has served me really well when I'm traveling for work or spending time in between the two coasts. Because of how consistently I practice that routine, I often find myself placing an order with the same beauty vendor for all of the elements that I need to make that routine happen. They're easily accessible regardless of what state I'm in. This vendor has great shipping and returns policies. And because of that, I've become quite the loyal customer, particularly over the last 15 years, during which I've accumulated over 30,000 loyalty points, and I've spent a lot more than I would like to think about with this brand. However, recently my loyalty was tested, and I had a very different experience than what I've been used to. Despite ordering from the same address and device for a year and a half in New York, my orders were suddenly blocked when I was trying to have any items delivered. So I could still pick up in store in New York, I could still pick up in store or have deliveries sent to my address in California, but New York home deliveries were off limits. The culprit? This merchant was working on their own approach to handling abuse, leveraging hard attributes like billing address and delivering address, which in my case don't always match. Now, obviously, this makes it harder for me to purchase from that brand. So rather than buying directly, I've had to make purchases through other vendors when I am in New York. But I'm just one consumer. So that's probably going to cost them a couple $1,000s over the course of a year at most. But this kind of challenge at scale can cause significant revenue loss for this vendor in my example, and for businesses who don't have the ability to differentiate between good customers and policy abusers. So during the live session, we launched a poll and we asked if any of you had any similar challenges to this beauty merchant, perhaps a policy that you had implemented but had to roll back because it was having some adverse effects. And these were your responses. Nearly 30% of you have had to roll back a policy, and over half of you either are just getting started in your new policy abuse prevention journey or are still really early in it and haven't had this experience yet. So it might be that you are experiencing some challenges as you're getting set up, and you may need some help putting the right policies in place the first time as you go along. So for many of you, it might beg the question, why would a merchant make a policy like the one in my example? And the reality is that policy abuse is such a significant challenge for many merchants. And once they're able to get a sense of how much that challenge is costing them, they're often looking to move quickly to stop the bleeding. But what is this discrepancy, and why is policy abuse so top of mind for merchants? To understand this, you have to really think about what motivates consumer behavior. The reality is that between uncertain economic times, high inflation, concerns about job security, and more, consumers have had it really rough over the past 2 to 3 years, and it's made them think more before they make a purchase. especially when that purchase is with a brand that they are not familiar with. As a result, the cost of customer acquisition increased significantly, and we saw a pretty pervasive shift in revenue generation strategies away from those centered around new customer acquisition and in favor of those that were more focused on building loyalty and growing customer lifetime value. In order to build loyalty, merchants really focused on creating unique, customer centric experiences that would keep customers coming back. Things like personalized offers, lenient return policies, etc. These became really popular tools for doing so. And it worked, customers responded well. But unfortunately, bad actors also took notice, and policy abuse increased exponentially as a result. Now, there are various types of policy abuse. So, these are the categories that are most common, and a few examples of how each type of abuse may be showing up in your data today. What's incredibly interesting, though, is that there's been a bit of a shift in abuse trends over time. So, merchants are usually experiencing more than one form of policy abuse at any given moment. With the right data in place, you might actually be able to see that one form of policy abuse might actually be influencing trends that you're seeing in other forms of policy abuse further along the customer journey. And let's dive into what I mean, leveraging some very specific trends. So, promotions are often correlated with abuse. Things like coupons, personalized offers, as we discussed on the previous slides, are becoming really popular tools for driving customer loyalty. But what's really interesting is the impact that promotions are having on refund abuse. Following a promotion, 15% of refunds are determined to be abusive in nature. So they might involve things like wardrobing, returning damaged items, sending empty boxes or fake items back, for example. And what's more, during times of a large drop sale or a large promotion, the rate of return actually goes up by about 12.5%. Additionally, we've noticed that once consumers start returning, it's more likely that they will return again. The chart here shows the chances of future returns based on previous activities. Once a user has made 3 returns, there's actually about a 39% chance that they'll return again. With their fourth return, it jumps to 50% chance, and so on and so forth. So, serial returners actually pose a greater risk of perpetuating policy abuse. And the trend really underscores the need for effective policies that can accommodate a nuanced understanding of who your customer is and not a blanket policy that lumps good customers in with your returns abusers. What's also really interesting is understanding how returns abuse could potentially impact your business during the upcoming holiday season. In January, Forder commissioned a study with Harris Poll, where thousands of consumers across the US and the UK were asked some pretty direct questions about their approach to shopping and returns during the 2023 holiday season. And the result of this study was pretty astonishing. Over half of consumers admitted to returning items after using them first. A quarter of consumers actually made a purchase during the holidays with the intention of returning the item. So it's not just that they tried an item, realized it didn't work, and sent it back. They're actually making purchases with the intention to commit policy abuse, which is a newer trend that we're seeing. And what's also interesting is that in both regions, millennials and Gen Z are by and large the culprit of this particular type of policy abuse, which is unfortunate because those two are buying centers that are often targeted by retailers and digital businesses more broadly today. Now, what makes policy abuse so difficult to address is that consumers are very sensitive to any changes in their elevated shopping experiences. 92% of consumers actually expect benefits for being a regular shopper. 70% of consumers said they will churn if a merchant's return policies become too complicated. 56% will stop purchasing if a brand simply implements a charge for returns. So there's now a really delicate balance that merchants have to strike between protecting consumer experiences and protecting their revenue. And that requires a shift towards policy creation that doesn't discourage them from making purchases in the first place. During our live session, we asked what are the impacts, rather, of policy abuse that you are all most concerned about. And these were your responses. 40% of you were concerned about the revenue lost from policy abuse. Another 40% said that you were concerned about all of the above. And these are numbers that have actually been reflected quite clearly in the conversations that I've been having, both with customers and prospects during discovery calls, during live events, industry conferences, et cetera, et cetera. So let's discuss why some current solutions fall short. In-house monitoring is often inefficient and it's very manual, so it drains a lot of resources. It's typically inaccurate as well, and it struggles to measure the broader impacts of policies, which we saw in my example from the top of the recording. Rules-based solutions can alienate genuine customers and fail to block bad actors effectively because they're also looking at it at an attribute level, looking at things like email, delivery address, versus what an identity-based solution like Forder looks at, which is the who behind a transaction and the behaviors that the who is exhibiting, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few slides. Other identity solutions might lack the necessary data to identify abusers before they reach your site. They have smaller identity graphs, which makes them less accurate. And so it can be really challenging to successfully navigate this evolving landscape of policy abuse when there are so many opportunities for tools to fall short. So let's talk about Forder's approach and how it can help. Forder's abuse prevention solution detects and stops abuse at the source, protecting revenue while also ensuring that you are delivering an excellent quality experience for your genuine customers. It blocks or flags abusers at checkout and post-purchase. It ensures seamless customer experiences, and it provides complete visibility and control through our self-service capability in the Forder portal, which is called Policy Builder. So what does that mean specifically? It means that you can create and optimize policies using your own data to see the revenue and customer experience implications of a policy before going live. You can modify your existing policies if you're not happy with their performance. You can use simulations, which leverage your own data to test policy drafts, learn how those policies will impact your customer experience and revenue, either leveraging the last 30 days of your data or by sitting in listen mode and showing you how those trends may be changing over time as new transactions are coming through. You can also view insights to understand the abuse trends in your data over time. And finally, you can set alerts directly within the portal that enable you to act quickly should any spikes in policy abuse, above your custom thresholds occur. And this is what our in-product experience looks like for any of you who are curious. The first GIF is showing you an example of what policy creation flows may look like, and it varies a little bit depending on the type of policy you're building, but generally the modal is really simple, really easy to navigate, and gives you a significant list of attributes that you can leverage to customize your policies as you would like. The second GIF is showing you what it looks like to run simulations. So again, that's the ability to test and learn before you're pushing your policies live. The third gives you a bit of a sneak peek into the Insights tab. So it's showing you how your trends are shifting over time. And if you scroll down far enough, it'll actually give you a list of transactions that were impacted by your policies and simulations, so you can do some more digging and learn even more. For any of you who are curious or would like to learn more, we're super happy to talk you through the entire flow in more detail during a live demo, so you can make that request at any time. Now, regardless of whether or not you decide to leverage Forder as your policy abuse prevention solution, there are a few best practices that you can leverage to set yourself up for success. And we want to make sure that we share them with you so you can make informed decisions about which tool best fits you and your business. When evaluating a solution for mitigating policy abuse, you want to look for something that allows you to customize your policies. Unlike fraud, policy abuse is tricky to solve for because the same policy abuser engages with policies differently from merchant to merchant, simply because each merchant has a unique set of policies that can be taken advantage of in different ways. You want a solution that can adapt to the challenges of your environment. And the key here is to look for tools that can address abuse at multiple touch points, like purchase and post-purchase. You should also look for tools that will enable you to flag transactions rather than just blocking them all outright. This is what's going to give you the ability to create super customized, tailored experiences that give you the ability to respond differently post-purchase. For example, if you're getting an item not received complaint or service not received complaint. Measurement is another critical aspect of evaluating a solution. It's really important to understand policy performance both before and after implementation, and whether or not your solution can simulate the impact of a policy on a set of customers to understand what that impact would be. Analyzing data to assess the solution's impact will help you to make the necessary adjustments and optimize its performance. And this continuous monitoring really helps to ensure that your solution remains effective and can be refined over time to better combat abuse. Finally, and most importantly, look for an identity-based solution. So this involves focusing on treatment rather than just looking for opportunities to decline. So this approach will not only enhance security, but it also improves your overall user experience by reducing false positives and ensuring that legitimate transactions are not unnecessarily declined or experiencing friction. It also allows you to create customer experiences like instant refunds for your top tier of customers, for example, that are very curated and allows you to make sure that you're continuing to build customer loyalty and increase customer lifetime value. All right, so to wrap up, we hosted a live Q&A and also asked you for any submissions of questions that you would like us to answer. And we are going to go over those questions and answer them for you now. Question number 1. If a policy abuser creates 100 synthetic accounts to perpetuate policy abuse, what would happen? So this is a great question. Now, the first and second transaction from those synthetic identities might go through to start, but the system that Forder has built is designed to understand the who behind a transaction. So our systems will pick up on behavioral patterns, leverage device intelligence, and more to identify that the same entity is actually behind all of these accounts, even when that entity is using a low and slow approach, maybe just creating one new account per day, et cetera, et cetera. So the abuser won't be able to continue perpetuating the policy abuse, and your revenue is saved without you having to implement more friction that harms your customer experience for legitimate customers. Question 2, what should I look for in my data to determine if I have a policy abuser in the mix? This is another great question. Now, the tactics that you leverage may vary depending on what tools you have in place, but the approach would be to start looking into your data and trying to establish patterns. So for example, if you're going to look at all of your returns to try and establish any returns abuse patterns, see if you can identify patterns in who the people are that are issuing return requests, even if it's without using some sort of smart solution. If you can look at the number of returns, you can pretty much start to identify if someone from that same region is requesting returns more often. If there's a specific payment type that's being leveraged when returns are being requested, et cetera, et cetera. And the same goes for promotions or item not received or any other kinds of returns complaints. Just start by isolating those specific use cases and seeing if you can pick up on any patterns within them. And of course, using some sort of data-driven approach or third-party vendor will absolutely help. If you've implemented Forder in this instance, for example, the easiest way that you could start to identify trends would be to run a few simulations. So if you're trying to identify returns abuse patterns, you could run a simulation that measures the number of returns that go against your policies within a window of time that you select. A historical simulation would instantly show you what your abuse trends that fall under those categories look like over the past 30 days. A production simulation would essentially sit in listen mode for as long as you would like, and it will show you your abuse trends based on your new incoming traffic, but without actually making any decisions or taking any actions to decline. And what's great about that is if you decide that, yes, the simulation is working the way that you would like, you've identified some trends that you find alarming and you want to intervene, you can really easily exit simulation mode and push that exact same policy live just by hitting the publish button. Question number 3 was a follow-up to question 1, and basically highlights the very real challenge that sophisticated policy abusers can leverage a wide variety of tools to mask their behavior. And that, again, is a great point. If you're trying to link based on specific hard-coded attributes, points like those in the example our attendees mentioned earlier, using a fake name or different address, then these tools would make it difficult for a rules-based system or an in-house system to accurately identify a policy abuser. But what was described in this response is what we at Forder would define as a behavior. And at Forder, we identify that same behavior across multiple abuse attempts to help us recognize who you should be trusting and who you can't. Meaning, I can identify that a particular entity is using a VPN repeatedly, or that maybe there's a suspicious rerouting that's happening repeatedly, or that the names don't check out with what I would expect from that behavior, or a device is different than what I would expect, etc., etc. Fraudsters and abusers, even when they're generating virtual machines or creating some sort of fake device, they tend to repeat the same behaviors to perpetuate abuse in similar ways. And if you're looking at the overarching methodology, paying attention to how people work, that's actually how you can start to identify a series of behavioral patterns over time and link them to an identity. So we look at how identities behave over time, see if that behavior seems similar to the behavior displayed in other transactions, and we start to look at what the probability is that those separate transactions are being conducted by the same identity behind them. And we're happy to follow up with anyone who would like more information and would like to walk through how our approach can help solve for any abuse case that you're experiencing. Question 4 was in response to my answer to question 3 and asked, how many orders would it take to identify a behavior like that? It's hard to pinpoint a number because it depends on the specific use case, but typically if we're seeing someone who's trying to manipulate an identity within the 3rd or 4th order from a different identity, we would already pick up on the fact that something weird has happened here. And again, we don't have to block that user right away. You can choose to flag them if they are, for example, a reseller that is proven to be more profitable than harmful to you. So there is flexibility in the approach that you can take once you have the information you need. And these are all of the questions that we have received to date. So thank you again for bearing with us. That's all of the content that we had to share with you today. If you have any additional questions again, or if you would like to talk more specifically about your own experiences, we are more than happy to chat live and to set up a demo just to give you a better sense of how Forder abuse prevention can help you unlock the best possible experiences for your customers while successfully detecting and stopping policy abuse. We thank you again for your patience, and we look forward to keeping in touch.